Happy Friday, everyone. It's Friday, January 20th. And for those of you following Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the crypto market, probably starting to get a little bit excited out there with what's going on. Well, let's talk about what's happening in the markets and try to put it in context. And there'll be more on this as the next week or two evolve. But today, when we look back over the last week, Bitcoin is up 10.5%, Ether is up 12%. At the same time, the NASDAQ is basically flat, up around 1%. And this is in the face of many other news stories. Most notably, the biggest news story today is Genesis filing for bankruptcy. What is obvious to anyone who has a pulse, who's following the markets, is that that was the most telegraphed news story maybe I've ever seen. I talked about this weeks ago, that they were in a shadow Chapter 11 where they were trying to get their creditors to agree on a plan to move forward. But Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss obviously were not going to agree since they threatened to file suit. So, boom, here we are. We're into a Chapter 11 filing. A clear case of sell the rumor, buy the news, however, as the market looking at this doesn't see any more forced selling as a result. Because frankly, anything that could have been sold in terms of Bitcoin or Ether has already been sold. Now, sure, the assets of the parent company at DCG could well be on the block, could well be set for sale, etc. But it doesn't look like any of the assets, as in the crypto assets owned by them, will have to get sold. For example, Grayscale, if Grayscale did have to get sold, there would be no reason for them to liquidate what they have. The buyer would want to keep it going. And to be blunt, would almost certainly want to keep their lawsuit against the SEC going. But we'll talk about that in the news section a little bit later. But when you look at the market action, it's actually extremely important to contextualize what's going on. Remember, Bitcoin's use rates are at an all-time high. Its hash rate is doing extremely well. The network is solid. Ethereum has gone back to being significantly deflationary, and their network looks pretty good. There are multiple other stories. Solana, which is still well below its all-time high, at $22, down from 200 and some odd, but it's certainly well up from the $8 that it pierced on the downside when the forced selling happened a few weeks ago. And even they have good metrics in terms of growth of their network and use cases for that. So there's a lot good going on fundamentally in crypto. But on the technical side, we're into a very interesting situation. As the market continues to float towards the top end of the trading range that we were in all summer, which was roughly around the 24,500 for Bitcoin level, and it's definitely floating in that direction, it becomes very interesting to see a confluence of events, because the same level, 24.5, is exactly where the 200-week moving average of Bitcoin currently sits. Now, to remind everybody, in the summer, post Celsius, as the contagion spread, Bitcoin, for the basically first time in its history, fell below the 200-week moving average. And it's been there for the last 8 months. Sort of, that's how people define the crypto winter, being below that average, because that's kind of an important point. Except if you consider the fact that if the market manages to break to the upside through the bottom to the top of that trading range that we had for the summer, if it gets to that point where all the forced selling is considered gone and there's still buyers and the market goes past it, it could break past its 200 moving average to the upside. If that happens, one would expect the animal spirits from all the technicians to be released, and a fairly sharp rally could easily ensue. Bottom line, I'm not saying it's going to happen, although I do think it probably will. But I would be very careful if I were shorting Bitcoin right here, because there is not all the people who had to sell are gone. There's not a lot of FOMO alongside speculation, that's for sure. And you can see that in the muted liquidation numbers we've even seen during this rally. Yeah, they seem large relatively, but we haven't hit $1 billion in liquidations and on the short side, and that means there's a lot of dry powder out there. So that's something to be known. I also want to make a note on the macro side, and I'll be talking about this Monday with Scott Melker. The fact is, at the same time that people are saying the Fed is going to be screwing all risk assets to the wall, and they're going to continue to do so, gold is pushing towards its all-time high again. Now, I think gold has been, a lot of it has been demonetized by people in Bitcoin, but the fact that gold is doing so well can't be ignored. for people who look at Bitcoin's value case, because after all, the upside for Bitcoin is becoming digital gold, which would imply, quite frankly, a price in the $500,000 range, or well over 20 times where we're currently trading. Now, obviously, the market is not pricing that in, but it does mean that a rally in Bitcoin, it's not really being impeded in a world where gold is breaking towards its upside. So whatever macro factors have made Bitcoin trade more like a NASDAQ stock, there are a lot of people out there who are the long-term investors who believe it should trade more like gold does, although with a lot more upside because it has a lot of catching up to do. So it's important to understand that. I wanted to have this cast making it clear that I think that that is where we're going. I think that 23 is going to be seen as a turning point year as Bitcoin starts marching towards digital gold. And I think that the recent price action actually is leading towards what could be a seminal event. Now, like a lot of events in markets, it might not happen. I have a habit in my life of being right, but being way early. So I wouldn't go out and speculate. And please do not consider any of this investment advice, but I would be careful on the short side. So that's what's going on in the market. I think that Genesis was the first news event that has to be talked about. I don't know what to make of the back and forth. We know that the DCG was trying to negotiate with its creditors. They even said today in the news story they're looking at a Chapter 11 specifically to reorganize to get back to profitable operations. So it's not like this is a fire sale, but who knows what will actually happen? I am not an attorney. What I do know is the market had this priced in. And so it's not the big event that we were thinking of. The big events that could be to the downside still would be if somehow DCG were forced to liquidate Grayscale, but I can't imagine or can't see how that would happen. Or if there's other contagions out of Genesis, other firms that go bankrupt that have collateral that has to be sold. That's what Mac Alfred is worried about when he's tweeting, and he might very well be right. But I do think that most of the bad events have been priced in to what's going on in the market. As a contrarian who has been relatively bullish since December, and then you've all seen it here, you can go back through the archives and watch. I do think that the risk is more to the upside than the downside here. But there are a lot of things that could happen. Clearly, the Fed tightening more than people expecting, a global and macro environment could slow it down. But I reiterate my call that I've never actually been more sure of the chances for Bitcoin to achieve that digital gold status than ever before. And I think the market is giving you a very good opportunity to buy there. Okay. So what else has happened this week from a news perspective? We've seen really a couple of small stories. We saw Nexo getting sued by the SEC. Now, I like to rant about the SEC sometimes, and I still hate regulation by enforcement. But honestly, if you're a lending platform that is not registered with the SEC at this point, you have to know you're going to get sued and you have to know you're going to have to shut it down. In Nexo in particular, I find problematic because I date back to, and I talked about this a couple months ago, their 33 tweet storm where they talked about how they were able to make yields. And their first one was talking about arbitrage between exchanges. And the second one was other sorts of proprietary strategies that use derivatives. And to be blunt, we know a lot about those strategies because CoinRoutes has maybe the only commercially available platform to allow people to arbitrage between exchanges and to provide spread trading between CeFi and DeFi platforms as well. So there just isn't that much money for someone who hasn't invested in technology like Nexo hasn't to be able to actually create that much yield at that scale. So I think they're taking a lot more risk and maybe they've done it right. I mean, maybe while Alameda or while others that failed were going long the crypto market in the summer, they were going short it. And so maybe they made their money that way. I don't really know. But what I do know is I'm not surprised by what the SEC did. And frankly, I don't think the market cared a whole lot. The other big news this week that was fascinating was what happened when the Department of Justice announced they were going to make a major bust, a major announcement. And so the market, when they said that was going to happen, took a dive and dropped like $600 to $1,000 in Bitcoin because everyone was afraid that they were announcing they were going to be going after Binance. Instead, the press conference starts and they named that they were going after a company called Bizlotto, which I'm willing to bet everybody who's watching this video had never heard of before this announcement. And of course, as the announcement was happening, the market rallied. And so by the end of the day, the market was back where it was, actually slightly higher, and we're higher still today. Now, what does this investigation actually mean? Well, it means a few things that are actually interesting. The first thing it means is all the people who spread the FUD that says that Russia could use crypto to avoid sanctions were full of shit. Because the reality is, this small exchange, which laundered a few hundred million, not the billions they would have needed to do, got caught. Why? Because blockchains are traceable. They quoted Chainalysis in a lot of the press stories about this. You can't use crypto to evade sanctions or to make large scale money moves, because at scale those moves will get found. So that's important. Second, what they didn't do, even though, yes, I think some of the funds ended up at Binance, they did not implicate them criminally, nor any other crypto exchanges that I know of that are more of the ones that people actually trade on. So life marches on. The DOJ is doing its job stopping money laundering. That's good. Crypto, as public blockchains go, generally is traceable if you're trying to do something like that at scale, but probably not going to be that bad if you're trying to move $600, which the law still says people are going to have to report on Venmo in a year and a half, or in a year, whenever the law goes in. I happen to notice Senator Loomis talking about how crazy it is that law was just suspended for a year instead of being repealed. Well, maybe they'll repeal it, but if they don't, expect to see a lot more people using crypto in this country for reporting instead of cash for that reason. And sure, it's traceable in size. So if someone runs a large business taking $599 transactions, they're going to get caught. But if you want to pay a babysitter, you're probably not going to get caught. If you want to pay a dog sitter for watching your dog's 2 week long vacation, you're probably not. And it's really important to understand that we have a society which allows a certain amount of cash use for that sort of reason. And most people support that. It's very politically popular. So keep that in mind as we look toward the future. I'm going to stop there. Have a great weekend, and let's see what happens with the Bitcoin market over the next weekend going forward. Bye bye.